ocean can make the continents rain. Yet in all your might and glory, vanished from the skies, leaving just another story. It seems man-made lies. They tell us how you fell from the sky. Your once proud beauty of...
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American Hour. I'm your host, Clay Douglas. And my guest today is John Kaminski. Hello, John. How are you?
I'm well, Clayton. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, sir. And John, the direction I want to go in today, there's two things on my mind. I've been writing a story here called "We Put the Wrong People in Jail." Now, maybe that's starting to change. Maybe that's starting to change because we actually put the head of the World Bank into jail.
Oh, I think that's a setup. That's some kind of political party setup where they're trying to ruin his candidacy. To, I guess Sarkozy's not running again for president of France, but I'm sure there's another candidate that they want to get. This is some kind of character assassination setup that they did to this guy.
You don't think he might be just another Jewish pervert that thinks he can use women any way he wants because of his power system?
Clayton, how could you say such a thing?
Well, it's actually fairly easy for me. Now, I'm going to bring a special guest up here. Hopefully, we'll check. A lady that you know.
I've never met her, actually, but I know her work, and I'm very proud of it.
She's traveling, so we didn't know for sure whether she could actually...
Hello?
Hello, Allison. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Allison, I've got John Kaminski on with me, sort of sitting in as my co-host, and he knows of your work and knows of you, and I know you're traveling, so I didn't know how long you would be able to stay on with us.
Yeah, it is a busy time for me, so if you already have a guest, maybe it would be better to just stick with him.
Well, I would like to get your opinions on a few things. This is what I plan to do today, just to get your opinion on a few things, and then as soon as you have to go here, you can go. I mean, that's you know, I know you're busy, but I was starting a story out, and I'm working on a story here because American sovereigns, anybody that thinks of themselves as being a free man or a sovereign, is under attack by the Southern Poverty Law, and now that's spread to the mainstream via 60 Minutes. While I was working on that story, I came across another story that wasn't getting much mainstream play, and that's about Israel shooting Palestinians that were protesting over in Lebanon, in another country. They shot across it. They wounded over 100. They killed a dozen people or more. And suddenly I felt like I, as a conspiracy theorist, as an anti-Semite according to the ADL or Southern Poverty Law, I felt like a Palestinian. I felt like I was being targeted, set up for somebody trying to kill us. They tried to put the blame on a shooting. There was a shooting. We don't know who shot who, really, other than two Americans, a father and son, were shot more times than Bonnie and Clyde. And they used that, Southern Poverty Law used that 6 months ago. I've been covering this story for 6 months. They used that 6 months ago to try to demonize the sovereigns, anybody that was trying to beat the banks, anybody that was trying to beat the income tax, anybody that was trying to get the truth out. Southern Poverty Law did their usual hatchet job on it. Now that spread to 60 Minutes. And at the same time, Israel's shooting children, women and children that are protesting across the line for their right to return to Palestine. and I wanted your comments on this, Allison.
Yes, I'd be glad to. This is actually this type of thing, as I think you know, and I think probably many of your listeners know by now, has been going on for decades, really. Palestinians, both Christians and Muslims, were ethnically cleansed in one of the most massive ethnic cleansings of the 20th century, beginning in about 1947 to 49, and then continuously in smaller stages since that time. When these people have tried to return to their homes, to their farms, to their villages, to their cities, to their jobs, they are called infiltrators and shot. So this went on from the earliest years. People, Americans hear reporters about infiltrators trying to get into Israel and being shot, and, maybe even good people who don't like the idea of killing others are led to believe, well, after all, these are infiltrators, terrorists, and therefore maybe Israel has to defend itself. Without knowing, no, these are people who were pushed off their own lands, their ancestral lands, and were trying to return. Back in the 50s, this was going on. It continued in the 60s, 70s, on through today. What happened recently is on the anniversary of their major expulsion in 1948, called the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. Think if Americans were pushed off our land, I think we would call that a catastrophe.
You mean
so this was
you mean like a million Americans that have lost their homes this year alone? I mean, this is it's happening here in America.
It is a catastrophe. Well, this was 750,000 people, which is a very, very high percentage of the entire population, were pushed off. So then, on May 15th, there was a plan, much like these other uprisings throughout the Arab world, that was organized through social networking largely and other ways, that people from all around Palestine and from what is now called Israel would again, in large numbers in this case, try to march back to their homes. They were unarmed. It was to be a nonviolent march from all directions if possible to just go home. There were thousands of people there apparently, and Israeli forces used, again, lethal violence against them. The number I had seen, but I haven't confirmed it more recently, is that 16 people were killed and 400 were injured. That's according to the Palestinian News Network. That's usually quite a good source, but we know breaking news stories sometimes later revised. So I think that's the number. I think there were 16 killed and several hundred injured by Israeli forces. There was very little coverage in the U.S. media about this. I noticed the Associated Press, for example, I was looking at their headlines to see what they had covered, and the New York Times were two of the places I had looked. And none of them put this in their headlines. Imagine if Palestinians had killed 16 Israelis. There would be headlines about Israelis having been killed. But here we have the reverse, where Israeli forces killed, somewhere between a dozen to 16. Amnesty International is saying 13, and they're very cautious. So clearly at least 13 people were killed. And yet that's not considered newsworthy enough to make it a headline. So again, Americans don't know what's going on. We don't know these are people that were from that land trying to return to it. And we don't know that we, as American taxpayers, give Israel over $8 million per day of our tax money. And that's what's enabling these atrocities.
Well, it's a little bit more than that when you add in all the military aid and add to the fact, why don't we talk about, and our press is filled with data, and John, I'm not excluding here. If you've got a question or something to add to this, please jump in there.
Boy, do I have questions. First of all, I want to say hello, Allison Weir. The general behind If Americans Knew, which is just the message that she's given us. You've been at this a long time. The question that popped into my mind as you were talking is I was thinking about the extrajudicial supposed Osama bin Laden assassination, and how similar it was to the Israeli policy of believing that they have the right to go into any country on earth and snatch people and take them back and execute them after a kangaroo trial. What are your thoughts on how Americans are becoming like Palestinians now? They've been consigned to the same role. Their country is being taken away from them. More and more people are being put into jail on trumped-up charges, or outright eliminated on the spot if they say too much that disagrees with what our controllers want us to do.
Jerry,
how about America as the new Palestine, Allison?
Jerry and Joe Kane. Jerry and Joe. The story I was working on, been working on for 6 months, is the one that
I didn't ask you, Clayton.
It is the one that aired on, but it's my show, so I can jump in. It's the one that aired on CBS. They killed Joe and Jerry Kane before they ever proved that they shot anybody. There was no proof. There was no trial. There was nothing. They were executed too. And this is exactly what this whole point of this whole show is about. I had to jump in. I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
All right,
Allison.
Clayton.
Go ahead.
Well, what I want Allison to. I asked Allison how Americans are becoming like Palestinians. Tell us about that, Allison.
Well, I think these are important comments. We're not, of course, fortunately, anywhere near the oppression yet of what Palestinians are living under. I mean, you know, what they are literally imprisoned in, for example, in Gaza, and virtually imprisoned in many villages and towns around the West Bank, where quite often they cannot even get out of their own village or town because they're surrounded by Israeli forces preventing that. So what they're living under in Palestine is far beyond what we're experiencing now, but certainly there's great concern at the direction we're going. I think many of us, I hope masses of us, are appalled at what's happening with our country, at policies that, it's not that it's new. Many of us have been really horrified to learn about the number of assassinations that our intelligence agencies and the CIA have done in the past overseas. But this was considered shameful. It was not considered proper. Therefore, it was kept secret, at least, because the American public was not in favor of this, and because, as you point out, it is illegal. What has happened in recent years, especially under the previous president and the current one, if anything, even more under the current one, we have the U.S. government acting in the same way that the Israeli government has been acting for a long time, which is basically going around the world, killing anyone that they wish to do, without a legal process. Both in the U.S. we have conservatives talking about a rule of law and being in favor of a rule of law. I think most liberals also are in favor of that. And yet we have our government violating any kind of legal process in ways that are appalling, that are despicable, and that are impacting us as well, right here. Even if people don't care, well, that's far away, I don't see them, they're foreigners, maybe they're Muslims, and therefore they're not my religious or cultural brethren, which I disagree with. But, even if people look at it in a very self-centered way, they should be very concerned about what's going on here, because our liberties here that are supposed to be enshrined in our Constitution and are being violated here from all directions. And more of us need to speak out about this. We need to oppose it. We cannot, we don't know the facts about bin Laden at all. We know very few of those facts. But even if we assume the government story is fully accurate, that he was as horrible and responsible for mass deaths as many people have been led to believe, without really full evidence, even if it were that bad, we have legal process. In fact, especially if it were that bad, would have been all the more important reason to have had full transparency about his capture, about them having, he could easily, clearly, if that's who was there, have been captured alive, not just killed. Clearly there would have been many questions to ask him, information he would have had, that a normal legal process could have been undertaken. That's what one would have wanted for a secure nation. Instead of killing him largely, clearly in cold blood, he was unarmed, and his body was dumped in the sea. This is just astounding to me.
Well,
that
it's American
this has
justice.
happened and more people are not outraged.
It's quite possible, Allison, it's quite possible, according to all of the information we have, that they buried him at sea very quickly and didn't want to show anybody the picture because you might have seen the frostbite on the body after being kept frozen for 10 years, you know?
Allison,
There are
I
all
wanted to
sorts
ask you
of
a
serious
question.
questions. I agree. There were reports about him being killed in 2001, I think it was. There are others that say 2006. Perhaps those were incorrect. But, if the government story is true, they certainly could have proved it to us, and they have not done that.
Well, we've got the same thing with 9/11. This is what they do. Warfare by deception is their motto, for God's sakes. And the deceptions run so deep, they couldn't afford to put bin Laden on the stand if he was alive at all, because he would have revealed his partnership with the Bushes, with the banks, with the matter of fact, one of the stories that I'm working on now, we were talking about Michael Harari, who's featured in my book, Mystery Babylon, about he was working with the Mossad for General Noriega